Over the years, we've roasted a few birds, from the outrageous puff pastry chicken to the more sensible ChatGPT chicken, all in pursuit of the crispiest skin, whole roasted chicken. Today, as promised, we're doing our first consolidated episode, utilizing techniques that were really game changers and see what we could come up with. And first and foremost, the no-brainer. We're going to dry brine the bird. So, as usual, 0.6% salt, inside out. We're not using baking powder because we are going to use the Kewpie mayo, and we have to factor in the effect of the rice vinegar of the mayo, which does a similar job to the baking powder, changing the pH level of the skin for better browning, better Maillard reaction. I also changed my mind on salting. Yes, it's chefy and badass to salt from high up, Thomas Keller style. But depending on how dry your bird is, I find for dry brining to be the most effective, you really want to work the salt in. As usual, onto a wire rack, into the fridge uncovered. The salt will break down the protein fibers, helping moisture retention, tenderizing the meat, and the fridge would dry out the skin, removing surface moisture, the #1 enemy to browning. I'll see you in 3 days. After 3 days in the fridge, the chicken's ready to play. Now, for anyone who's followed all 8 episodes, I don't think there's a hint of ambiguity that the best result came from separating the skin from the flesh and inserting a layer of filo pastry. So, we start with that. I think there's enough footage of me doing this, so the regulars can skip this part. There's an unfortunate hole here from the butcher, so hopefully we won't make it bigger. As usual, we remove the wing drum. Just cut around the wing drum to release the flesh. One bone out. And the reason why we do that is that when it shrinks, it's nice to have the flesh from the wing drum with us. All right, one plaster later, the skin is semi-removed. Not my best work, but hey, it's a long 2024. Now we're ready for the filo pastry. So, here we have a filo pastry. To help them stick and bind better to the chicken, and knowing Kewpie mayo worked like magic, we're gonna start by brushing a layer of Kewpie mayo on the flesh side, acting as a glue, and of course, bringing some beautiful umami to the flesh. And knowing the difficulty of dressing it back up without ruining this layer, we're giving this a margin of safety for the skin to come back on. Everything well covered, we brush another layer of Kewpie mayo. And that's why we're doing this last minute, because if we were to leave it in the fridge, the pastry will absorb too much moisture and become too soggy. But now we're giving the pastry just enough moisture to really stick to the flesh and stay in place, becoming the moisture barrier while in the oven. So now, very carefully, put the dress back on. First one leg, the other leg, now over the top. Do the same for the other side. Bit of tearing is unavoidable, unfortunately. Now, to further enhance the Maillard reaction, 3 days ago, we skipped the baking soda, knowing the rice vinegar in the Kewpie mayo will help us change the pH level for the better. Now, another game changer we've discovered is the potato starch and its ability to absorb surface moisture. So we're simply going to mix a tiny teaspoon of potato starch with the Kewpie mayo, forming this Maillard reaction enhancing, moisture reducing paste to be brushed on the surface. Very thin layer. Now, what else changed the game? Vertical roasting. So, of course, this whole thing will go on the vertical roaster. And that's why we haven't removed the wishbone. Season this with oil to prevent sticking. Make sure this is tight. Good. Once again, we bring the legs together so that the knuckles and the thinner part of the breast will not overcook. And this will hopefully help the pastry stay in one place. Perfect. Now, this whole thing goes into the preheated oven. Knowing the fact that Kewpie mayo doesn't really burn that much, we're going to start at 240. After 40 minutes in the oven and a 10-minute rest, During the roasting, I decided chicken needs to go horizontal for the latter half, for the breast to really have a chance to brown. We have this beauty. Now, let's try one out, shall we? Look at that. Beautiful. Alright, let's do it. Somehow, it's nowhere near as crispy as when we did it with just the filo pastry. I wonder whether that's the Kewpie mayo or the moisture from the vertical roaster. Extremely moist, but that's just the salt brining. Tasty, yes. Pretty, yes. Skin almost saggy, and as you can see, the filo pastry has almost dissolved instead of holding its shape. I suspect that was because of my brushing of the mayo. With all the techniques that worked individually, this is probably the least crispy chicken we've roasted on the channel. I suppose that's a wonderful way to end 2024, knowing the journey will always continue. It's definitely not worth my finger.